But let's look closer to home. And another crazy leader, another sick government, not as bad as Russia's, of course, but still it's cutting a deal, a defence deal with its ally, the Chinese dictatorship. I'm talking, of course, about the Solomon Islands. It's in missile range of Australia, missile range. And it has signed a defence agreement with China that lets in Chinese soldiers and naval ships. Now, most Solomon Islanders actually seem dead against Chinese influence there. I mean, they've had anti-Chinese riots just last November. But some politicians on the Solomon Islands say, well, look, the reason China's got this defence deal with the Solomon Islands government, bribery, Chinese money, their pockets. And privately, government MPs here say exactly the same. And there's another element. The Solomon Islands Prime Minister, Manasseh Sogavare, seems also to be a nasty race baiter. You know, one of these leftists with a massive chip on their shoulder looking to take offence at white people. Frankly, he sounds nuts to me. Here is his rant against us in Parliament yesterday.
We must do so as an independent sovereign nation, not as a group of black-faced people tucked away in the backyard of some countries, Mr. Speaker. Oh, by the way, sir, that term is offensive to us. Very offensive. In custom, backyard is where toilet is. It is where pig and chicken pens are located. It is where rubbish are collected and burned.
What a joke, playing the race card now. This idiot even claims that Australia could be about to invade the Solomon Islands, when in fact I'd worry more about his new Chinese mates.
We deplore the continual demonstration of lack of trust by the concerned parties and a touching warning of military intervention, Mr. Speaker, in Solomon Islands if their national and strategic interest is undermined in Solomon Islands. And I think the Minister of Foreign Affairs has highlighted that. In other words, Mr. Speaker, we are
Liberal Senator James Paterson, Chairman of the Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. James Paterson, this Prime Minister sounds unhinged.
Andrew, you can't expect me to want to comment on that. I think it was an interesting speech that Prime Minister Sogavare gave in the Parliament, and there are certainly things in that speech which the Australian government would strongly disagree with, but it is his sovereign right as a politician in the Solomon Islands to give whichever speeches he likes, and ultimately he'll be judged by his own people in their own system and not by us.
You're quite right. I might try to tease you out with a provocative question, but you're a very diplomatic guy. Let me put it in a very nice way. Listening to those rants, doesn't it make Labor look stupid when it says this kerfuffle about a possible Chinese military base in the Solomons, missile range of Australia, it could all be sorted out by Scott Morrison or our Foreign Minister just giving this guy, the Prime Minister there, just give him a little call and that they could sort it out. He is amenable to reason.
Andrew, I think that is a fair point. I think it does illustrate the challenges that we've faced in the Solomon Islands, and I think it does highlight that had just one more phone call been made, had just one more visit occurred, had just one more dollar of aid been spent, that this wouldn't have happened. It highlights the absurdity of that. I thought equally absurd was Anthony Albanese's comments yesterday in a press conference where he criticised the Prime Minister about a level of contact he'd been having with Prime Minister Sogavare. In doing so, he admitted, Anthony Albanese, that he'd not yet had his intelligence briefings, which had been offered to him and made available to him about this issue. Can I just say, had he had the benefit of those intelligence briefings, I don't think he would have made that comment. And the fact that he chose to speculate about something which he has not been briefed on publicly in the middle of an election campaign is grossly irresponsible and reflects his immaturity and his lack of understanding on national security. And frankly, if you're not up to managing the sensitive issues of national security, you're not up to being the job of Prime Minister.
Well, I think you're being a little harsh and unfair there, to be honest, James. I mean, this bloke is trying full-time to get on top of his housing policy. He hasn't got time for this kind of thing as well. That's a struggle in itself, the housing policy.
Oh, and the NDIS.
I just wondering...
And his immigration policy.
Oh, the NDIS.
And the cash rate.
Yes. Okay, so you see, you can't get around to foreign affairs, please. How bad could this confrontation with the Solomons get?
Well, I hope it doesn't get any worse than it already is, Andrew. We have expressed our very clear disagreement and disappointment with the decision they went into to arrange this scheme with the Chinese government. We've made very clear our concerns, while also noting and respecting that they are a sovereign government and they do have a right to make decisions in what they deem to be their own national interests.
No. Well, I ask you how
But
bad it's going to get. If you're not going to go and speculate on that, I don't. If you're not going to speculate on that, I don't want to hear the rest about how great you are. But listen to this now. Let me put this in a more diplomatic way again. China is also trying to get a foothold in Papua New Guinea, right? You've got a Chinese company there. It's got land on an island just 200 kilometres from a mainland, has plans to build a huge city there. Can you imagine the opportunity for graft, by the way? And another Chinese company is building a port in Timor-Leste. And it's already trying to buy influence there too. And that is only 700 kilometres away. Now, how worried should we be?
Andrew, we've been aware for some time that China has very expansive ambitions for the Pacific. They have been wanting to establish a presence, a permanent presence and a militarised presence in the Pacific for some time. And the government of the Solomon Islands is not the first one to have received an offer like this, and it won't be the last. And we have to be on guard to this threat. It is a very serious one. Anyone who's familiar with the history of World War II, and particularly the conflict in the Pacific, will understand why it is incredibly strategically important to Australia. It's one of the reasons why we launched the Pacific Step Up 5 years ago, because our interests in the Pacific are very clear. And it's the reason why we refocused our international aid program to the Pacific. It's the reason why we haven't said irresponsible things like Richard Marles has, which is we encourage China to take a greater role in the Pacific. In fact, we are engaged in a zero-sum game for influence with China in the Pacific. And if they are to gain further influence, as Richard Marles invites them to, that would be to the detriment of our national interest.
Hey, James, I know you feel as passionately as I do about this issue, as the late Kimberley Kitching did too, or would have. We have sent 200 Bushmasters, our own homemade armoured vehicles, excellent vehicles, to Ukraine. They're already in action there in the war against the Russian invaders. We are also sending 6 howitzers. This is actually terrific, right? But should we be doing even more?
Andrew, we're constantly evaluating whether we can do more, and if we identify opportunities to do more to assist the Ukrainians, we will, because they're not just fighting for themselves, they're fighting for the fate of the free world. And it is absolutely in our interests, as well as being the right thing to do, to help them prevail in this contest, because I agree with you, it must end with the defeat of the Russian government and Vladimir Putin, not their success. Because if they are successful, it will be not just at the cost of the Ukrainians, but everyone else, as other authoritarian powers may learn the lesson that they can get away with this. So we are doing as much as we can, and we will continue to do as much as we can, because we have real interest at stake here.
James Paterson, thank you so much for your time.